You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 131 for February 28th, 2018. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's episode, Bill, Doug, Steven, and I talk about field schools and getting a job this spring. So dust off your field pack because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Doug in Scotland.
Hey.
Steven in Calgary.
Hello.
And Bill in California, but we're having some connection issues with him, so he may not actually join us, but I wanted to announce him just in case. He may just show up randomly into the podcast and start interjecting his ideas. So hopefully we get it worked out and everything is okay. When dealing with university computer systems and internet, sometimes there are connection issues. So, okay, well, today, if you're listening to this in real time, it should be February 28th if all went to plan and the world didn't end and everything came out on schedule. So it's a great time for people to be thinking about at all levels of your career and as a CRM archaeologist, for you to be thinking about either finding a job if you've been off for the winter. If you're lucky enough to have had a job through the winter, fantastic. But a lot of people, of course, are unemployed or just doing other things or had scattered work around or whatever for the winter, and they're going to be looking for the field season to kick off, usually in early spring or late winter, to find something new. So we're going to go over some of the things you can do for that. This would be a good episode, even if you're a seasoned, field technician or crew chief or whatever, maybe just to refresh your memory on some of the things you need to think of and do. And then, of course, as we get near the end of the semester here, there's going to be a lot of students looking for field schools over the summer, and we'll have some talk about field schools. I think we're going to start it with field schools because that's kind of the progression. We go from field schools and then we go into jobs, right? So let's talk about field schools first to get that out of the way. I think we're going to try to link to some of our older episodes on field schools because that information is still valid. So we're going to try to have a shorter conversation here just to refresh everybody's memory on where to find information and how to apply for field schools and things like that. Also, the Women in Archaeology podcast and the Archaeology show have both done episodes on field schools. It's a huge topic right now for people that need it because it's a requirement, usually, not always, but usually it's a requirement for people to get a job in cultural resource management that they've attended a field school. So, but first, let's talk about where you can find them, where you can find different field schools. If you're in school right now and you want to go to a field school, your school might actually offer a field school. So if you haven't heard about it yet, that would be weird. But if you haven't, ask your advisor, ask your professors, something like that. Do you have a field school? Do you have any recommendations on field schools? Things like that. I'm going to go over some stuff real fast here. Shovel Bums, the website, usually has a guide out, but there's some weird things going on as of the recording of this podcast at the beginning of February. So I sent Joe Brandon a message saying his website's kind of messed up a little bit. We'll see if his field school guide picks up. If it doesn't, there's still links at the bottom of the page. If you scroll back to all the craziness, there's still stuff to give you ideas on where to find field schools and what to do, things like that. You can also just, if you're interested in going to a certain place, like you want to do a field school in Portugal or something like that, just type up Portugal field school or something and see what shows up. Archaeological field school, maybe, something like that. Doug, do you know of any other places that have a field school list over like in the UK?
Yeah, Badger, the British Archaeology Jobs Resource, has a list of sort of approved field schools. So these are ones that have been vetted because sometimes you can get fairly shady would be the right word to describe some schools, field schools. Most are good, but sometimes you do have ones that try to bill themselves as archaeology field schools, but in reality, like there'll be some in Texas where you basically are just hunting for arrowheads and there's no archaeology.
Yeah.
It's stuff like that. And so you just have to be a little bit careful about ones that aren't done by approved universities. If you look at who's running it, and if it's not run by a university, have a look around and make sure you're not going to something sketchy. Again, that's very few of them, but it's just something to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Stephen, I'm interested in your thoughts on field schools, because you worked at a place for a really long time where, you were bringing in different people to work on projects and things like that. If you had a field school requirement as part of the necessary list of things to have when applying for a job, did you care what kind of field school people had, where they went to field school or anything like that? Was that a concern, or was it just check the box field school?
Yes. Generally, I think most employers want to get someone whose field school experience is most similar to what we're going to be hiring for.
Mm-hmm.
So part of that is, like the cultural history, the types of cultural materials you're going to find, the style of digging, that all of that sort of thing. So typically, a lot of employers tend to look at, what's going on locally for field school. So, like, if you had a local field school, that's probably a better bet than someone who, say, went to Pompeii or someplace like that. Like, if you went abroad, there are a lot of questions, and part of that is because we don't necessarily know what happened at that field school, so we can't necessarily judge what skills were taught, how the skills were taught, stuff like that. That said, I have a couple of times hired people who had field schools that didn't look very good, and they worked out great. But those people, and we'll probably talk more about this later when we talk about hiring, but those people got hired less because of their field school, and more because of other actual experience, like real world experience that they had. So at that point, for those people, field school is just a tick box. But for most people, it is a way for us to kind of guess what kind of experience you have, what you're familiar with, and stuff like that. And then often, if we use, again, hiring, if we use references, your first set of references will be from, people who led your field school.
Okay, sounds like Ruckus agrees with you. I'm not really sure though.
He never agrees with me.
It's got its own opinions. Doug.
Yeah, I would just echo what Stephen said. It's the same for the UK. At least here in Scotland, a lot of the local units prefer to see someone who has Scottish experience instead of like someplace like Cyprus or Greece. It'll help you, but it's not the only factor in getting a job. Just having a field school is quite helpful. It might be one of those push factors where if they had two equal candidates, looked the same on paper, but one had a local field school, they might go with them over you. But then again, there's something to be said about going to a field school in a different country that might be in an area you're not working in. You'll have more diverse range of experience, and it could just be a good, a field school. While it's a requirement for a career, it's also a good experience to figure out if you actually like to do archaeology out in the field. So I would also say there is something to be said for doing something different. That being said, I think if you're new to archaeology and you're listening to this podcast, you've never gone to a field school, be aware they can be quite expensive as well. Some can be free, but you usually are always paying for at least how you get there and stuff like that. But a lot of them will charge, and then depends on your university, you might also have to pay tuition for that field school to have it count as like a class credit if that's something you're after. So just be aware, it can actually get really, really expensive quite quickly to do a field school. So cost can be a factor.
To build off of what Doug was talking about, I think that I'm a big proponent in getting a wide, breadth of experience. So there's nothing wrong with, going someplace that does things completely differently as, an attempt to kind of, broaden your skill set. On the other hand, keep in mind that if that's the case, if that's what you've done, if you are looking for something, like a job locally, but all of your field experience, your field school experience is abroad or not local, you need to make the case in your cover letter about why you're looking for a job locally. Because the perception will be that you're just kind of slumming it, and you just, you don't really want to work here. You're just looking for a way to pay the bill. And
right.
When there are a lot of candidates, that's lacking the enthusiasm that's really going to get you the job.
Can I also add, you can go to more than one field school as well. I've known quite a few people that have done multiple field schools, so it's not just something you have to do once. Though again, going back to costs, it could be just something that you only do once. But if you're interested in archaeology, I would actually recommend possibly doing multiple field schools for different experience. It'll build up your months and weeks of actually doing archaeology, and it'll give you sort of a diverse range of experience. So you can maybe try out 2 or 3 different types of field schools run by different people. Again, assuming it's quite cheap and you're actually able to do that.
All right. So what you guys are saying is leading me to think of a little more fundamental question about field schools here and the types of field schools that you can go to, because Doug and Bill. Oh, and by the way, Doug and Steven, Bill is back in the podcast, so he'll have some comments here later. How's it going, Bill?
Good.
All right. So anyway, let me get into this. So the type of field school you go to. So both Stephen and Doug were mentioning different things you can learn and skills and stuff, and the types of field school that you take, which leads me to wonder what's more important, because Stephen, you were specifically saying, if you took a field school somewhere over in, wherever the heck country, and you went to this field school and now you're looking for something over here and you don't have like the local experience, it makes me think, what's more important to learn at a field school? What is the actual purpose of a field school? Is it to teach you? My thought was it's always to teach you sort of in-field scientific skills, because in university, if you took like a lab class or something like that, you'll learn practical scientific skills, or at least you should in a lab class. You'll learn how to take measurements, take notes, do things like that. Real scientific method kind of stuff. And then the field school is like the outside field portion of that. So if you're taking a field school in, Belize, like everybody does, or Jordan, or, Southeast Asia, or wherever you're at, and you're learning to do things in a scientific way, even if it's not the same culture as, say, Calgary, if you're hiring somebody to work there, or Wisconsin, or Reno, Nevada, or something like that, if it's not the same culture, but you're learning the skills of an outside field scientist in archaeology, isn't that the most important thing?
Yes. Kind of 2 thoughts on that. The first is, yes, absolutely. That you are trying to learn or trying to teach the scientific process of archaeology and get practical experience. And like Doug was saying, find out if you even like this sort of thing. A lot of people love archaeology until they have to do a field school, and then it's like, no. So yes, in that respect. However, various regions, there is a sort of regional culture to how you dig, and that can vary greatly. The way that they dig in the UK is very different from the way that people dig in Alberta, and which doesn't mean that people who learned how to dig in one place can't transfer over, but there are certain implicit procedures that you will follow that is kind of weird. It's like, that's not what we do. That's not why we're doing it. Like the underlying theoretical approach is different, say.
Yeah.
So, and then also from an employer perspective, and this isn't necessarily mine, but I know that a lot of employers have this perspective, is that, we want you to know how to dig the way that we dig. A lot of employers, like on the job training is a part of is part of hiring a new hire, right? Like someone who's fresh out of field school, you're gonna have on job training. That's a given. The way our catalog sheets are different. from different firms' catalog sheets, even if we're recording these exact same attributes, there's going to be a certain amount of training.
Right.
But we want to keep that to a minimum, right? And when we hire, we want someone who's as closely trained to our own internal procedures as possible.
Okay.
And because, it's like time is money, training is money. And as everybody here knows, and the margins are pretty thin for archaeology. So I think it's a little bit of both. On the one hand, like no one should expect a field school to teach everything there is to know, but it should provide you with the hands-on, doings of archaeology and a general approach towards digging. But at the same time, we want that what you're looking at when you're working for us.
Okay. Well, we're having some slight technical difficulties, so we are going to go to break right now. We're going to fix it, and we're going to bring back in, and I know we're going to have some awesome comments from Bill and Doug about this. So let's do that, and we'll see you on the other side. Are you interested in hosting your own show on the Archaeology Podcast Network? If you're passionate about a topic and can come up with at least 10 episodes right now, I'll wait. Then contact me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. We'll go over your options and what we can do for you. That's chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Don't let your passions sit in a file cabinet or on a dusty bookshelf. Broadcast them to the world with a podcast today. Back to the show. All right, we're back for the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 131, and we're talking about field schools. And when we left off the discussion, I sort of asked a little philosophical question on the purpose of field schools. Is it to learn the culture history of an area? Is it to learn, technical skills? It sounds like when people are looking for field school requirement from a potential employee, that they want regional experience, which tells me that they're preferring sort of a cultural background rather than a technical background, because archaeology is done in very similar ways across the entire world. There are some differences, obviously. Some places you'll do something where you won't do another thing, or you'll record stratigraphy in a different way, one place versus another. That I understand. But the act of using a trowel or a brush or a shovel is kind of the same no matter where you're at. So, there's that. So, Doug, you had a comment on this, and we'll see how much you disagree with me on this.
Not as much as I normally would.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, it's not gonna be like I completely disagree, Chris. I think there's, in a sense, a field school doesn't matter. If you take it during the summer, it's possibly going to be another year, maybe more, before you actually get your first CRM job. So you're going to forget a lot of what you're doing. It's more of a chance to give you a bit of experience and then things to say on your CV. So when you're looking at field school, if it gives you a chance to do survey, that means you can talk about it on your CV or your cover letter. If it gives you experience with excavating, you can talk about it. If it gives you experience with recording, you can talk about it. It sort of gives you the stuff, but honestly, you're only going to be there for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. It's not going to prepare you to do any of the jobs. It's really just to give you a taster. And I think from a person who's going for a job, it gives you some material to work with when you're writing your cover letter. But realistically, it's not going to turn you into an archaeologist. And the one thing I'm going to slightly disagree with you on, Chris, is actually I think it will. There's different ways of digging for different climates, different things, and it gives you a bit of experience. So in a sense, digging in, like, say, Washington is very different than digging in the American Southwest. And it'll give you that experience so that if you have had a field school in in Washington, Oregon and stuff, you'll know that you need to be prepared for rain, and that basically it's going to rain the whole time you're digging shovel test pits. I think that's a valuable experience, and that helps in that you know what to expect. But in terms of detail, a year later, you're probably going to forget how to fill in a contact sheet. I could be wrong. Yeah. Maybe that's just my personal experience, but I think it's more of a dabbling is what you get out of it. And if you get to do a lot of different things, you could put that on your CV and on your cover letter, which will help you get a job. But it's not going to make you an archaeologist unless someone disagrees with me.
No, and I'm going to interject here too. I think the dirty little secret to behind field schools and more specifically CRM archaeology. I mean, if you're going to field school for another reason, then fine. But for CRM archaeology, if you're going to be a contract archaeologist, I think one of the real reasons that field schools are somewhat valuable is because it's really difficult to get experience as an archaeologist right out of college with no experience. Let me just put it that way. With a field school, you're paying for experience and anyone will take you. So as long as you have the money and you apply for it, you'll get the experience. And you can't pay for experience in other fields like that. Like you can't just say, oh, I want to be a construction worker. They require experience. You can't pay for construction working experience, but you can pay for archaeological experience, and we call it a field school. So that gives you your first job, so to speak, even though you paid to be there. It gives you your first experience outside in the field. So, Bill, go ahead.
Okay, one of the things that I'm starting to see, though, about field schools, and I agree that it's just a taste of what it's like to go out in the field, and that where else will you be able to pay, really, to get experience, right? I mean, it's a proxy for experience. But one of the things I'm starting to see is people who are very, very far in their undergrad degree, possibly even almost done with undergrad, and they still haven't taken a field school. On the field school that I did for my PhD dissertation work, there was a guy who had finished his entire degree, and he was taking 6 extra credits of undergrad to get experience in archaeology because he really wanted to do it. And the guy had worked his entire way through college. He couldn't just take off 6 weeks in the summer. He had to work to pay his tuition, and it wasn't until the end that he took it, and fortunately he liked it. And just like in my experience, I also had to work all throughout undergrad, so I didn't really have time to take 6 weeks off during the summer, which is a time when I could work full time and earn more money to pay my tuition, until I was in my junior year. And then I decided, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I really have to do it now because I'm going to be done with college in a few months. But there's a lot of people who they take summer courses, or they have to work like I was talking about, and they just don't take field school, and they get to the end and it's kind of like, now what are you going to do? Because you never took the field lab methods class. So, no matter what you say about archaeology, you've never actually done it. So, someone like that, I guess, if you just want to go ahead and keep moving through all your studies and I don't want anyone to just get a cold sweat because they're almost done. This is their last semester of school. They just found the podcast. They're listening to this episode and then they're saying, oh my God, I'm never going to get a job, At the end, you can go ahead and just take field school at the end, but also if you don't want to take field school, you can fill in by working for a museum part-time, working, see if you can get some part-time work with a CRM company, see if you can fill in the gaps during Christmas and during spring break and other times so that you don't end up having no experience. And actually, someone who, if they started when they were a freshman and they worked 4 hours a week all the way through their entire education for a CRM company, or they volunteered or had an internship, they're going to end up with a lot more experience overall than someone who takes a 6-week field school, but they'll have to apply themselves over the entire span of their education.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I didn't do my field school till my junior year. I had to work during summer as well. Same thing, ended up liking it. But also, there's a lot of digs that will be open to people to go to for one day in your area. So you can maybe go on a Saturday or Sunday, again, if you don't have to work those days. So you shouldn't think about getting just experience just in a 6-week or 4-week block or 8-week or however long it is. You can get experience other ways too.
Yeah. In the last part of this segment, I want to talk about the types of field schools, since we're sort of leading into that. Like, what are you actually going to learn? So I want to talk about the types of field schools that you can and maybe should take depending on what you're doing. There are field schools out there that are how should I say it? A little more focused on maybe excavation, things like that. Like a lot of people go to field schools in Belize, let's just talk about that. And down there is a lot of excavation that happens down there because you're dealing with monumental archaeology and things like that. And if that's the kind of thing you want experience in, then fine. But if you're actually looking for CRM experience or something like that, my advice would be you should probably stay in the United States if you're a U.S. archaeologist. If you're not a U.S. archaeologist, stay in the country that you're in and look for something that is going to be doing similar things. And maybe you have to contact some employers out there and say, can you recommend any field schools? Do you know any local universities that have something that would help out? I know the University of Nevada, Reno has a couple field schools here. One of them is up in Oregon. It's still in the Great Basin. And the other one, I think, is in the local area to Nevada anyway, local to Nevada. And we'll give you a similar experience if you wanted to work in the Great Basin for that sort of thing. So, Bill, go ahead.
I agree with that if you want to work in a certain area. But we've talked about this before, that college is the time you could shoot for the moon. So if you really wanted to do that, Finland field school or that Estonian, Paleolithic dig, that now's your chance. However, if you do want to work in the United States, which, if you're a U.S. citizen, that's your most likely option, you should probably think about doing work, like we were saying, either volunteer on weekends or do some kind of, part-time internship in your area so that you can get experience. But also, I think the other thing is you can't really anticipate what you're going to get. I mean, those Belize field schools is pretty straightforward. You're going to dig, and someone's going to show you what to dig, and you're going to find all kinds of cool stuff. But I mean, if you do a field school, for example, the one I did when I was an undergrad was in northeastern Oklahoma, and we did a lot of excavation, but there was also artifact analysis, artifact processing, some survey through fields using a little bit of the old theodolite and stuff like that. I mean, we had a lot of different stuff. And then the one that I did for my PhD, I also made sure that everybody had a chance to do artifacts and excavation. So you can't ever know what you're going to get next. But there's also some individuals who go to these field schools and they end up not really learning anything, and that they just end up filling up bucket after bucket of artifacts, and they just tell them to move on to the next unit and do it again.
Yeah. And this is kind of actually running counter to what I was saying earlier, where we want to hire the local people who have the local experience. The problem with that, as far as planning goes, I mean, as an undergrad, how do you know where you want to work? I mean,
yeah,
like, or where you're going to end up working, because like most of us, we don't have the necessary life experience to be like, I want to work in this region. I want to, I love working in the Southwest. So I want to work in the Southwest. Our experience as far as that goes is a lot more like, where do we want to live? Where do we want to, or where have we always lived? Do we just want to go home? So on the one hand, yeah, like what employers want are people with the local experience. On the other, what you might end up wanting could be a completely different thing. And you may end up looking for work in places where, your field school doesn't necessarily apply or doesn't isn't as relevant as a more local field school.
Yeah, that's a good point. How do you know what you want to do when you grow up? I think, though, that a lot of people get into archaeology. This is just my sense of the people I know, and myself included. People get into it because they are maybe interested in a certain area, and then they can start looking there. But I think you make a good point, Stephen, is that, take a field school. If you need a field school and you have to choose where to take a field school, maybe take something that you're comfortable and familiar with if you want to, or you want to learn more about. Or you can do like Bill said and go crazy. That's what I did. I went to Africa, for Christ's sake. Did nothing for me. Take something that's comfortable. But then once you become a CRM archaeologist, before you settle into one area and you maybe put a 3-year lease on an apartment or buy a house, travel around a little bit. I worked in like 18 different states, and I know definitely where I don't want to live, and I know where I do want to live. And it's not really based on the cultural history of the area. It's based on the type of work I have to do outside day to day, day after day. And that's where I want to be.
One thing about the Moonshot Field School is that it'll fire up that passion, right? I mean, there's a long time between the time when you're a little kid and you decide that you want to be an archaeologist and the day that you actually get to dig as an archaeologist. And if you do something like Belize or Ethiopia or something like that, that could be the kind of thing that sparks you and keeps you going for your whole career.
Well, and on a personal note, like my field school was fully integrated into my archaeology coursework. So the methods and theory class that we had when we're talking about methods was using the site that we ended up using for my field school that following summer as the, while we're debating what the method should be, we're actually talking about the real world site. And then we went out and did the field methods class, which is the field school. And then our artifact analysis class was working with the artifacts from that field school. So it is very much structured into the overall program. And I think that, in my case, it was less about, taking field school that was going to teach me the certain skills or the region that I wanted to work or I might be interested in, and more about like being integrated into the actual educational program of my undergrad experience, which I think it's a different sort of thing, because the people who didn't do that and went off and took field school elsewhere were kind of out of the loop for like the other courses. And so in that case, I think it's a perfectly good idea to like integrate, just go with the flow of what your particular program is doing, because that relates back to the rest of your coursework.
If you're listening to this and you're thinking about doing a field school, you can be creative about how you go about it. Bill and I were talking about practicalities of how, we couldn't go do field schools because we had to work. And when I did my undergraduate, I did it with a different university because the school university I was at, they did this wonderful field school up at Chaco Canyon, but it was during the fall semester. So it was a full 16-hour, multiple courses, but you'd have to go up on a Monday through Thursday to Chaco Canyon. And I couldn't get that time off work to be able to do that, to go and do that. So I ended up going with Texas Tech to a different one, but I managed to make it financially viable because I managed to get my university, which was UNM, to give me credits for doing someone else's field school. So back then, the lottery scholarship in New Mexico covered your tuition. So I was able to basically go do a field school with a different university. I didn't have to pay Texas Tech, whatever their cost would have been, an extra, $4,000 or $6,000 to be able to take their courses and get credits for it. So there's different ways of thinking about how you do your field school. So even if you want to do those moonshot ones, think about there's different ways to tackle it. Don't just think of I can't do this because I need to get certain credits from certain organizations or it's too far away. Just try to be creative is my advice to give to people.
All right. Well, that is some great advice from everybody, and hopefully you can find a field school that will fit your needs. And always feel free to contact any one of us on Twitter or through this website. You can check the show notes out for that and find out our contact information. So we've all been through this, and we can maybe give you some advice, hopefully not steer you in too wrong of a direction. But when we come back from the break for our third segment, we're going to pivot just a little bit for the people that have already taken a field school or have graduated or have just been cooling their heels for the winter, waiting for the field season to start. And we're going to talk about jobs and what you can do to get yourself prepared for the next field season. Back in a second.
This network is supported by our listeners. You can become a supporting member by going to arcpodnet.com/members and signing up. As a supporting member, you have access to high-quality downloads of each show and a discount at our online store, and access to show hosts on a members-only Slack team. For professional members, we'll have training shows and other special content offered throughout the year. Once again, go to arcpodnet.com/members to support the network and get some great extras and swag in the process. That's arcpodnet.com/members.
Okay, we are back for the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 131, and we spent the first two segments talking about field schools. Well, now you've taken your field school, or you're sitting back after the winter and you're looking for a job here coming up this spring. As we're recording this, it's early February, but as we're releasing this, it's February 28th, hopefully, and now is the time. Actually, now is not the time, like last month was the time, but let's talk about it anyway. So, Bill, you've written a couple books that help people, I guess, navigate the waters of getting into a job and networking and things like that. You've written tons of blog posts. We're going to link to all these resources in the show notes, so check that out. But why don't you give everybody a little primer? What should they be doing right now if they were spending the winter not working or working for Starbucks and now they want to get a job? What should they be thinking about?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a two-pronged approach. If you have experience and if you've already done some CRM before, then, you know, all you should do is try to reconnect with the folks that you've already worked with, and hopefully they'll, you know, give you some leads, or you'll have some kind of way that you can, you know, get back on the horse again, I guess. Now, if you're just starting off, though, see, that's the thing. Now you've got to try to build that network. So that's when you want to try to be using the internet. I don't know, I guess I would say, you know, try to find Facebook groups. That seems like that's the most direct route to hook up with, you know, a few dozen individuals. The groups that I'm a member of on Facebook, the North American Archaeology Field Tech group, and I can't remember the other one, or maybe I'm conflating them too. There's hundreds of individuals who are on there, and they're fairly active. And if you said something, you were a member of the group, and you just said you live, you know, hey, I live in Northern California. Is there anything going down in the next few weeks or whatnot? Someone who knows anything might say something there. And so sometimes you don't even actually know individuals who are on those groups, or you never worked with them before, but you'll get a tip there. But I mean, the one thing that I think everybody should start thinking about is going through the network rather than just randomly applying to jobs, because in my own experience, I spent months and months and months applying, you know, sometimes up to 10 resumes and cover letters a week to try and get even my first bite. And I've written about it kind of extensively because I was totally lost. I had no idea. And I wouldn't say this was before Facebook, but it's before I was really using any of that kind of stuff. And I really wasn't using shovel bums, and I wasn't using archaeology fieldwork the same way that I do now. But I just was grinding out apps literally every single day, and sending them out and getting, you know, almost no information back because I knew no one, and I wasn't spending any time, you know, networking or trying to connect with individuals who already had those jobs. Now I'd say focus on that first, because if you can get information, that's really half the battle. If you can figure out who's hiring and maybe what kind of projects there are, even if you don't have a whole lot of experience, you can kind of tailor your stuff towards that specific job post. But you can also try to connect with individuals at that company, maybe call them on the phone. I know it might be, you know, they might be really busy and not want to hear anything from prospective job hires, but if you can get any kind of information, all of that helps you in your cover letter. So I mean, these days I would spend more time networking and trying to figure out background information before I sent out my resumes than just spamming out resumes.
Yeah, that's a real good point, because in a lot of areas, I know here in the Great Basin, sure, fieldwork might not start until a little bit later, but that doesn't mean. It's kind of weird, because people don't get contracts and then sit on them for several months and say, oh, we're going to start field work later at this date. Sometimes that might happen if there's time enough in the contract, especially the federal ones, where the BLM or the Forest Service knows that area is closed off for the wintertime because it's snow and they don't want to damage the roads. They're very concerned with that kind of thing. So that could happen. I mean, I had one that had like a year-long time frame because of the area that it was in was really hard to get to in a lot of places. So it's actually short field work, but we would come out in different areas. But I don't think that's really the standard in a lot of areas. People are still just, you know, getting contracts on a day-to-day basis. So if you're spamming them out, the more important thing, like Bill said, is just stay in contact. And I think personally, in the age of social media, again, like Bill said, the best way to stay in somebody's mind is to not send them a resume and constantly ask, and just be annoying like that. but to just be visible, be active in the Facebook groups. Don't just show up in the Archeo Field Techs group every time you want a job. Be active in the discussion. So next time somebody does post a job, they say, oh man, that person, I feel like I know them already. You've already got a foot in the door. Or, be active in the LinkedIn groups. There's a CRM Arc LinkedIn group that is not as active as I'd like it to be. I wish more people would post over there. It's more of a professional setting. So, just be active and be in front of people and find out where they are. Find out where these people that are actually doing the hiring or making the suggestions, find out where they're at on social media. It's kind of a tall order for archaeology because a lot of people just aren't on social media. But and Steven's mentioning in the comments, people still use LinkedIn. Not much. I mean, it's a great place to store your resume. And if you want to send out something that's not a PDF, I think sending out a link to your profile is actually still a pretty good idea if you can keep it up to date, because it's not something you have to deal with.
So yeah, I recommend to students to maintain their LinkedIn for a lot of reasons, specifically what you were talking about, where if you're active on those groups, then you can, people will look you up. Not only, I've talked about this before. LinkedIn is also kind of a search engine, and if you are trying to set yourself up, your online profile, to be a professional, LinkedIn's a good way because it's specifically for professionals, and you can get your name to rank higher when people look for your name and the word archaeology, or they look for anything archaeology in your area, but you've been really active and you're in an area where there's not very many archaeologists, you can end up coming up in searches, right? So maintaining that thing is great. And then also you can upload projects and stuff to it. I think that individuals who use Academia EDU are kind of shooting themselves in the foot, because that's not really a search engine the same way that LinkedIn is, and your papers will just be floating around out there without any kind of background information connected. So it's probably a good idea for you to post that same Academia EDU stuff, either double publish it to there and also LinkedIn, or just put it on LinkedIn. So maintain that thing and keep it up to date. But I think when it comes to archaeology, the key for LinkedIn is you can find a lot of people on there and you can find where they work. So you can use it to do geographic data mining. So you can just look for a certain area, try to find all the archaeologists there. You're going to find professors, you're going to find retired people, people who work for CRM, Forest Service, all that different stuff. And then you can kind of try to find ways to connect with them outside of LinkedIn or in some other way at a conference or in person, or ask them for coffee or email them or something like that, something that's not really intrusive. So you can make a huge database of individuals using LinkedIn. But I do think that in the next, generation or so, LinkedIn will kind of become the new resume thing for a couple reasons. If you're really good at writing cover letters and resumes, you can just game those automatic applicant systems. So nowadays, where you don't have to really write full essays for a lot of those government jobs, you can just say you have maximum proficiency in every single thing and click 10 on the proficiency level for every single thing, and then you'll get an interview. And then, much to the rage of the person who's interviewing you, they find out that you actually in fact don't know anything, and they've just kind of wasted all their time, right? So after you get frustrated with that, people are finally going to start figuring out some kind of another way to hire folks and get information without people just gaming the system. But also, I think a lot of times, especially as we spend more time networking and using more of our professional profiles are put on the internet, we're just going to start searching Google for individuals. And if you've done a good job with your LinkedIn, you're just going to come up high in the ranking, and people are going to see you and will be able to see you for what you do, rather than putting crazy cat pictures on the internet.
My piece of advice would be try to scattergun it when trying to build up these relationships and being on different channels and stuff. If you have the time, do multiple ones, but my recommendation would actually be pick one or two. So if you're going to do LinkedIn, really actually do LinkedIn, join groups, update your profile, connect with people, and do stuff there. The worst thing to do is actually just have a bunch of different sort of be all over the place. So you might have a LinkedIn profile, but you haven't updated it in 6 months or a year or 3 years or whatever. You might have a academia edu, but then again, you're not using it. So actually, you're sending the wrong message if people do come across you digitally, is that you'll have, incomplete profiles. And actually, any sort of social media or any of those websites take a lot of time. And it's better just to focus on one or two and do them well than try to, be on Twitter or Facebook, LinkedIn, academia edu, there's the other one, research, whatever. There's a bajillion different things. And I've seen people do too many of them, and it actually gives a bad impression because they don't actually do any of them well. So that's just my advice, is actually, if you're going to do one, pick one or two and do it well. And don't worry that you might be missing something else if you're not on Twitter, or if you're not on Facebook, or if you're not on LinkedIn. Any one of those networks has enough archaeologists that you can build a network, and you don't need to be on all of them with this fear that you're going to miss stuff.
That's a good point, Doug. I see so many people that have a LinkedIn or Facebook profile that says still working for a company I know they didn't work for the last 3 years. There are people that worked on my project 3 years ago that still says they're still employed by that company. And if anybody knows them even a little bit, they would know that that's not true. And that just says exactly what you said. They just set it up to set it up, and they haven't maintained it.
Wow. So going by what Doug says, I should probably delete a lot of my accounts.
Yes, 100%.
To be fair, my LinkedIn is still up to date. I just haven't had to update it in 3 years.
Right.
Because nothing's really changed, right?
That's still valid. That's a good point.
LinkedIn is very much more for getting other business contacts rather than employer contacts. That where it gets used a lot are for B2B sales, and not necessarily hey, I'm looking for a job, please hire me. And then for academia edu, I don't really even know what you guys are talking about, because it's where you post articles.
Well, also the other thing about academia edu, I guess everybody's going to hate me, right? It's what I end up seeing there is possibly what could be an awesome journal article, and then now they're in jeopardy of self-plagiarizing themselves by posting this pretty good, paper on there that should just be submitted to a journal, right? I guess if it was rejected from a journal, then you could post it on there. But then the other thing too about academia edu is, when you put half-baked crummy stuff on there, it actually kind of makes it look like, yeah, that's your, Anthro 400 term paper that you just put on there as kind of proof of who you are. And it kind of actually makes it look like you're not really serious. So if you were going to do that, you could just basically do what I do, is just make a blog, and instead of trying to pretend it's academic, just treat it like you're discussing something or trying to work a thought out in your mind, and just put it out there, right? So people are posting things to academia edu that aren't in journals. My understanding of it is it's that, it's like, here's the proof of something that's going to be in a journal that's behind a paywall. Well,
sort of thing. Yeah,
so you're right. That is true. That there is that. However, there is also your discussion about Hohokam ceramics from, the whatever site that's not actually peer-reviewed grade that you're putting on there to show that you've thought about, Southwestern archaeology. You understand what I'm saying? So there's awesome articles on there, but then there's also, term papers mixed in there. And then there's other things too, like Tom King's really well thought out white papers. So there's such a wide spread that why wouldn't you just put that stuff on LinkedIn, or just blog about it if it's a half-baked thing that you haven't really put fully together? I guess that's saying a lot about my blog, right? Half-baked thoughts that you haven't really actually vetted through any peers, right? Well, but the truth is, yeah, if it's just an idea and you have some research behind it, but you haven't really put it all together, why not just put it on why would you put it on your professional thing that's supposed to be demonstrating your ability as an academician? I don't know what to say about academia edu. It's not just only peer-reviewed journal articles that people are making available. It's also people's term papers and dissertation proposals and other stuff that's not quite even close to, I don't know. We're going far from the field school idea.
From jobs. Yeah.
You could put anything on there that's a document. You can use it for anything. But I'd say I'm hesitant to also like tell people to be on like things like Academia EDU and LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff like that, because each one of those platforms is trying to monopolize your time and take up more and more of it. And they all tend to be also a bit of closed shops. So if you're on LinkedIn, you occasionally can get to see like one person's profile, but then like after seeing one or two, they'll be like, oh, you haven't logged in, you need to be that. Or academia.edu forces you to now be a member of the website to be able to download the papers. Facebook, sends all sorts of stuff to your newsfeed to keep you clicking on those clickbait stories. I would just tell people, if you're going to be on those platforms, have a goal. Only do what that goal is, and try not to lose too much of your time to all these different platforms. Use the platforms, don't let them use you.
Mm-hmm. I think the idea is to look at the platform and see what its original intent is, and maybe try to use it that way. LinkedIn is for networking. That's what LinkedIn is for. It's for networking. It's for making contacts with professional contacts. Academia.edu, and ResearchGate, I see people putting stuff up and treating it like a blog, like some of you guys sort of alluded to. Like, they just write something, put it in a paper form, so you save it as a PDF and upload it to academia.edu. If you're going to do that, just have a blog. I think Bill's doing it right in that case. You just have a blog. And then, I think I'm going to start using. I put one thing on my academia.edu account like 10 years ago, and it was my thesis from grad school. So it wasn't 10 years ago; it was like 8 years ago. It was my thesis from grad school. I put that up there, and I still get hits and comments on it. And that's the only thing I've ever put up there. But I think I'm going to start taking my favorite Blue Apron recipes that we make and take a picture of those and put those up on academia.edu just as a PDF. That's what I'm going to use it for. Recipes, my favorite recipes. I'm going to use it for that. So, all right, just to game the system. I would like to see some joke LinkedIn profiles where people just put up like they treat it like Pinterest or something, and just put up pictures. Some BS. All right, so we are at the end of this podcast. This has been really great. I hope we didn't go too far off track here at the end, but it was still really great information. So. Yeah. So
before we go, the whole thing about field school is make sure you do it.
Yeah.
Doug and I, we went through serious efforts to do field school. I know that it's not going to be economically or plausible for people who have, families or other situations, but I do believe there's a strong correlation between getting hired in cultural resources and having ever done a field school. Almost everybody who's in CRM did a field school, and it would be difficult to find other people who didn't.
Right. I would say make yourself a really quick checklist. What are your goals? What do you want to get out of the field school? Do you just want to go there to experience another culture and country? Or are you actually looking for some very specific skills? Look at that. What's your passion? Do you not know yet? Then go somewhere else. Go wacky. Go nuts. Go out of the box. Shoot for the moon, like Bill said. And then look at cost. That's the other big factor. Write down all those things and then figure out which field schools fit. Put together a matrix of the ones that fit all those things, and then start contacting them and see which ones fit your needs. So, again, feel free to comment on this in the APN Facebook page. You can start a discussion in Archeo Field Techs on Facebook or the North American Archaeological Tech Forum. Most of us are in there and can comment and have this conversation. And more importantly, there's thousands of other people in there that have their own opinions, and they'll comment as well. So, in the meantime, go check out arcpodnet.com/members to help become a member of the podcast. As a side benefit, you'll get added to our Slack team if you're at one of the two membership levels that gets that, the second one and the third one up. And we can continue this conversation. You can talk to the hosts. Most of us are over there. We can continue this conversation and have a little more intimate discussion about field schools and whatever else you want to talk about. Also, check out our TeePublic store. I think we had an ad for that in this podcast. A lot of really great stuff over there. So that's it. Thanks a lot. And hopefully you pick out the right field school, and good luck applying for a job. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Adios.
Bye.
Doug's got a countdown running again. A text
Bye.
countdown. You did your bye before the countdown was done. This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.